Good afternoon. I'm Fred Birnbaum with the Idaho Freedom Foundation. I'm the Director of Legislative Affairs. This afternoon, I wanted to talk to you about an issue that we've been involved in, and that is the legislative pay raise. And it's been a very emotional topic, and one might wonder, why is it emotional? It's a $5,000 pay raise, as some people represent, and why are we interested? Well, I think you have to take a step back. Historically, the pay raises the legislature has gotten have been more or less in line with inflation recently. The pay raises have not been substantial. This particular pay raise was actually a 26% increase in the base salary, and when you bring in other benefits that are compensable, it's about 22%. And that's a lot, and our concerns are multiple. Right after the pay raise was approved, the governor took the recommendation from the Department of Human Resources, which works for the governor. Their recommendation for state employees raise was 4%, and he upped it to 5%. And you say, well, so what? Well, that's about $35 million, and that's in perpetuity. And then shortly after that, the judges asked for about a $45,000 raise apiece, and it ranges in percentage from 27 to 31. And so our concern is the pay raise discussion and the obvious grab for a pretty big percentage by the legislature sets off the snowball effect where other agencies, other state employees want more money. After all, if the legislature gets a big increase, shouldn't they? So then people say, well, wait a minute, Fred. IFF isn't right about this. The legislature doesn't set its pay. An independent compensation commission does. And that is true. However, there's a couple of important things to note, and this is why the House Concurrent Resolution became controversial. Prior to the House adopting that resolution, the Senate on its own had rejected the pay raise. After the Senate did that, the House took that resolution and it held that resolution in committee and it replaced it with the resolution, which we view negatively, which essentially allowed the pay raise to go forward. And let me get into some of the mechanics of this. So I'm going to read from a couple things here. They put forth a resolution that said, Article 3 of the Constitution provides that the legislature shall have no authority to establish the rate of its compensation, and that a citizens committee, and this is Article 3, Section 23, that's in the resolution. What they didn't tell you is in Article 3, Section 23, the rates thus established shall be the rates applicable for the 2-year period specified unless prior to the 25th day of the next regular session by concurrent resolution, the Senate and the House of Representatives shall reject or reduce such rate of compensation and expenses. So the Constitution clearly says that the legislature can reject what has been proposed by the Citizens Committee, and the Senate did that. What the House did was it put forth a resolution that ignored that clause in the Constitution and then issued a series of whereas clauses where they justified the raise. They spoke about how, yes, the raise was 26%, but since 2005, they'd lagged behind other state officials and they hadn't kept up with inflation. The problem with that is only 2 members now serving were serving back in 2005. So you're really making a false comparison. They also claimed that Idaho would only be at the midpoint of 25 part-time legislators. I have to tell you, I've done a lot of research, and if you look at the National Conference of State Legislatures, for example, there are only 14 of them. And when you have that 14 number, you see that Idaho currently is at the midpoint. So the problem we have is this resolution painted an inaccurate picture. It was a comparison that wasn't valid with either other state legislatures or with other state employees, and it essentially sold the raise. Now, some might say, Fred, well, they didn't have to do anything. The raise would have been automatic. But think of it this way. The legislature could have rejected the raise and you could say they deserve something, but that's what the Senate did, and that we viewed positively because it did save the state money. They could have reduced the raise, and I think that would be neutral. Because if they had reduced the increase to what other state employees are going to get, which will probably be closer to 5%, but between 4 and 5, that would sort of be a neutral action. They're taking the same raise. But instead, the legislature put out a resolution that was an argument for the raise, which, as I pointed out, really slanted the facts, ignored the fact that they could have rejected or reduced it in the resolution, and then said, oh, IFF shouldn't criticize us and shouldn't score this negatively because, after all, we didn't set our pay. But they can only do 3 things, the resolution: reject an increase, reduce an increase, or ignore it. And they chose to ignore it, and by doing that, they accepted the increase. Thank you. It's been nice to talk to you this afternoon.